Hello everyone, welcome back to Industry Insights. Today we're going to be talking about everybody's favorite handheld console maker, Nintendo, and how their competitive advantage can also be their biggest weakness. Hey folks, one quick note before we really get into the meat of this. I was about to publish this Industry Insights when Nintendo did their announcement for the Circle Spring exercise thing, and I think nothing encapsulates Nintendo better than to follow up a Nintendo Direct that was full of video games and follow it up with an exercise device that personally, I think is a little bit too abstract for the consumer market. But obviously that remains to be seen, so let's get on with the show. I've been toying with the idea of doing a Nintendo Industry Insights for a while, but I was never really sure which direction I wanted to take it, and I think I got my inspiration for this one from the GamesIndustry.biz opinion article that just popped up today being Friday, July 12th, 2019. And in this article, Rob Fahey, the contributing editor, reaffirms his belief that Nintendo is squarely in the camp of a toy maker as opposed to a massive video game media entertainment type company as you would find in something more like a Microsoft or a Sony. And in reading this article, you have to take the term toy a little bit lightly. I don't think you want to literally translate it to a child's toy, but what you have to do is you have to use the term more generally speaking and understand that with Nintendo in toy, it really means that Nintendo is more focused on the product and the unique experience that it can provide. And reading down through the article's points, the contributing editor makes a lot of really strong points in terms of where Nintendo's vision is, their late and or proper adoption of technology later in the cycle, their expansion into actual storefronts that almost kind of mimic a toy store. There's a lot that goes into the opinion here that Nintendo is much more focused on the product experience, because for Nintendo, that's what gives them their identity and what sets them apart from their competition. And that's really where I want to concentrate today when running this brief analysis on Nintendo and their position in the current video game market. To really understand Nintendo, you have to do two things. One, you have to look back on their product history. And two, you have to simply read their interviews over the years. And when looking at Nintendo through that lens, it becomes very clear that Nintendo has always been a company that was product and experience focused without excluding certain parties or demographics. They've always viewed themselves as the family game device, and they've always provided those peripherals and the games that would be friendly to a larger population of people. Now, don't get me wrong, Nintendo hasn't excluded the more hardcore game types or flat out refused those types of games on their systems. In fact, over the years, you can kind of see Nintendo become more and more open to those hardcore types of experiences. But Nintendo's bigger brand and image and vision has always been inclusion of all types of gamers. And that includes trying to pull people in who perhaps were turned off from gaming by simplifying the experience or making it more tactile. I'm going to read you a quote from an interview that Tatsumi Kimishima did with Time Magazine back in 2017 before the Switch came out. In response to a question about the social aspect of games, he goes on to say, and I quote, "This is just my personal opinion, of course. Nintendo, as you say, is an entertainment company, so we ask ourselves, what is entertainment? What is it to begin with? It's not just enough for us when we bring content to consumers, but we want to bring something that is comforting or comfortable. I think comfort is the word that comes up when I think about what it is that we have to provide for our consumers," end quote. And then there's some other entries here But then he goes on to say, quote, "For example, if you have friends who are playing together to solve something, or I see parents and their children working together to accomplish a specific goal, it's something I would put into my definition, that slot of what is comfortable, what is happy, what is pleasurable. Also, seeing other people happy. Being in a room where other people are happy is a source of happiness, is a source of pleasure." End quote. While this quote was in response to the social aspect of the Nintendo product lineup, it really sheds some light on where Nintendo sees themselves as the catalyst in that experience. And if you go back through the quote, you can see that he concentrates on the people playing together, people interacting together, people having that experience together. And while this is only one part of the bigger interview, it just reinforces that Nintendo vision that they are a catalyst or a conduit to experience the game and the device and the product, and again, we'll just call it the entire experience together. To bring this back to the original point, it reinforces what I believe is that Nintendo has a vision of being a more physical experience, a more interactive experience where the concentration is on the interactivity between the people or groups of people and the toy or the product that they experience. And I think this is where Nintendo has a different vision than the other console manufacturers, in that the other console manufacturers really view themselves as more of a platform or more of that way to experience something a little less tangible, whereas Nintendo has really concentrated on the more tangible type experience that their products bring to the table. This whole idea of the product focus really takes me back all the way to the 80s. I was an 80s child, and I very clearly remember the Nintendo experience of the 80s. And those of you who were around at the time probably remember the trackpad, and I think it was Rob the Robot, and some of the other experiences that Nintendo provided both on the NES and the Super NES. And they were always tangible experiences. And Nintendo has never really strayed from that product, or dare I say, toy-focused differentiation where they set themselves apart from their competitors by offering that tangible experience. And Nintendo's experienced some success with it, some strategy of product focus, but they've also run into places where it hasn't worked for them, and we're going to cover that in a little bit. But very clearly, especially those of us who lived through it, Nintendo has always been a tangible, physical-oriented experience. And while obviously they're going to expand today, I mean, the reality of the market is that you have to be a video game company. Perhaps you're a toy company in the video game space, or you're a video game company that still produces that product experience. But Nintendo has been consistent in that focus of a toy-like or product-based experience. To add further evidence to this idea that Nintendo is a toy company, I'm looking at an interview that Reggie Fils-Aimé did with Game Informer back in, let's see what it says here, back in July of 2018. And the interviewer asks an interesting question, because he's asking Reggie about a previous interview where he had said that he hopes that there's more than one Switch in the household. And I think this is a really interesting question, because when you look at a traditional console or even portable-based experience, there is rarely this emphasis on more than one device per home. Think about your traditional Xbox or PlayStation or even a gaming PC. It's usually one item per household. Now, I'm sure people can point at exceptions here or there, but the way that the market is traditionally analyzed is that there's one of these devices, maybe one from each company, or maybe a gaming PC and an Xbox, something along those lines, but it's traditionally one device per household. So when we see Reggie doubling down on this idea that they see the Switch as something that is a multiple device per household item, again, it kind of points evidence to the idea that this is, again, a toy focused, again, using toy loosely, but it's a toy or product focused idea where Nintendo doesn't see the product as something that you just buy once and it becomes this platform that everybody uses. It's something that everybody would want. I mean, I've got a little girl at home, and trust me, we have toys everywhere, right? I mean, it's the experience or the nature of that type of product, and I think that's what Reggie's getting at here, that we don't see this as something you just buy for one person. It's something that you buy for the whole household or all the children because that's how the experience is designed. The end goal isn't to just have 100 Switches sitting all over the house and you're tripping on them, and that would be ridiculous. The idea is that the product isn't something that is solely focused as just being a platform. It's an experience similar to a toy in that everybody will want to have their own. Now, I could probably go on and on about all of this evidence to prove that Nintendo is a product or toy-focused company, but it's not really where I want to spend the rest of the time on this because I do want to try to keep it shorter. What I want to do now is relate how all of this focus on the end product and the experience of the end product or toy gives us some clues as to how Nintendo is structured as a company, where they see their core competencies, and where this focus or this strategy is helping them and in ways where it's probably hurting them as well. When we talk about the business side of Nintendo, there is something we have to kind of put at the forefront, and we have to understand it before we get into it deeper. And that's that Nintendo does not have the capital available to them that something like a Sony or a Microsoft does. Now, don't get me wrong, Nintendo as a company isn't struggling. They're structured very well. Their profit and losses is balanced in a way that the fact that they're smaller has never really been a big disadvantage for them, but you do have to understand that they can't quite approach the market in the same way, and you see that a lot in the way Nintendo chooses a product differentiation strategy given their core competencies as a company. Put another way, Nintendo has to be selective about where they spend their money, and they need to give themselves a differentiator, or otherwise known as a way to stand out that their competitors cannot. And this differentiation strategy is what Nintendo is arguably good at. And it makes sense given Nintendo's history as primarily being a toy company until about the 1980s, when their company model shifted to what we could describe as a consumer electronics company. But even with the shift to a consumer electronics company, Nintendo never lost focus on the toy-like experience of playing games on their system or experiencing those unique Nintendo products in only a way that Nintendo can provide. While I've largely been positive on Nintendo up to this point, I kind of want to shift gears a little bit and just talk about the challenges or problems or perception issues that Nintendo has within the modern video game market today. There's no doubt in my mind that Nintendo is hitting it out of the park with the Nintendo Switch. You could say there with the numbers, the sales data, and everything else in between. The Nintendo Switch has put Nintendo back on the map after the challenges of the Wii U, which, interestingly enough, I think the Wii U actually provided some of the lessons that Nintendo needed to get back onto the path, and you can see that in the way that the Switch is constructed, but have to save that for another time. So, even with Nintendo's massive runaway success with the Switch, at least from a Western audience perspective, Nintendo still doesn't deliver the same sensibilities and platform standardizations that we see as far back as the original Xbox, meaning seamless multiplayer, seamless voice chat, and a consistent storefront where a digital library of games continues to travel with you from platform to platform. And over the years, Nintendo's solutions, if you can call them that, to some of these things have just been downright bizarre. I mean, with the most recent that I can think of that stands out in my mind is Nintendo's solution to seamless voice chat in their multiplayer games that involved a phone and like 2 or 3 different cords and a headset, and I don't know, the thing was a mess. It was almost hard to look at, again, at least from a Western audience perspective, and I think this is important to keep in mind, and I'm going to circle back around to it later. When it comes to Nintendo, there's, I think, 2 prevailing thoughts about why Nintendo can't seem to provide some of the platform technology and sensibilities that seem to have been standardized in the industry, yet Nintendo doesn't seem to provide within their product. And I think there's two prevailing schools of thought here. One is that Nintendo is just inept with online purchasing, with seamless multiplayer, voice chat, party chat. That's one prevailing thought process, is that Nintendo is inept in these processes. They don't have the people on staff. They quite literally don't know how to do it. So every generation is this new attempt to install these platform sensibilities, and yet they still can't get it done because they don't know what they're doing. That's one school of thought. The second idea is that Nintendo is very willful and deliberate in what they deliver to the market, and that decisions such as storefronts kind of being brand new per device, and voice chat and seamless multiplayer being this convoluted mess of devices and wires, is all purposeful and willful, because every time Nintendo creates a product or a quote-unquote toy, the solution that they want to build around the toy matches what their expectations for what that product or that toy is supposed to be. Meaning Nintendo has a vision of the product and the way it's used, and while they may understand that not everybody uses it in that manner, the vision or the way that they have the product designed is intended in their minds to only be used in certain ways or certain aspects by most of the market. Meaning, I'm going to forego these other platform ideas or sensibilities or seamless storefronts because we don't envision the product being used by most consumers in that manner. And this is where I come back to Nintendo's odd choices, if you could call it that, with the Nintendo Switch are willful. I find it very hard to argue that it's just stupidity or lack of business acumen on Nintendo's part, that a lot of the standardized platform supporting sensibilities that we see on something like an Xbox or a PlayStation are not repeated in something like the Switch. Nintendo is willfully foregoing those types of network sensibilities and storefront sensibilities when it comes to the Nintendo Switch, because the product focus doesn't depend on those types of advantages being there. The product itself is the advantage. And in trying to differentiate itself from the rest of the market, this is where you get into some of the weaknesses of a product-focused plan. When a company dedicates their time and their energy to certain aspects of the product, particularly the way that they see the product being used, it's willful, meaning Nintendo doesn't see the value add of repeating some of the same platform standardizations that the other companies have. It almost seems weird to say, but for Nintendo, I strongly believe that they see some of their odd choices as actual advantages for them, because it keeps them out of that space and having to deal with that space and having to spend money in that area, particularly when they see the device as a family-oriented device that in many ways the target focus is children and such. And that's why I think it's a very conscious decision to make a lot of those platform, what might seem like standardizations on the other platforms, it's Nintendo's conscious choice to make those difficult on the Nintendo Switch, because it creates a barrier of entry for folks that might not treat that space in the way that Nintendo wants it to be treated. Things like party chat or voice chat, right, is purposely left difficult as to create a barrier of entry to those that might otherwise use the system nefariously or in a negative or toxic manner. And when it comes to a digital storefront, Nintendo has always targeted that store at the device. And this is probably particularly a place where I definitely don't agree with Nintendo's approach, but I understand why they do it. With the product focus kind of makes Nintendo look at each product differently and supply the experience to that product, which creates this issue where the product is really the dominating idea behind how to access that digital storefront, and thus Nintendo has never really come up with the standard digital storefront. we continue to see that today with the Nintendo Switch. And again, I'm not in agreement on Nintendo's approach here, but their product focus has kind of pushed them down this path where every device and every experience is tailored to that device, including their library of games and ROMs that they've created over the years, seemingly recreated with every device that they put to market. And finally, let's just be frank about it. Nintendo sees a lot of value in repackaging and reselling the same ROMs or games from their classic library in every generation. There's definitely some willful ignorance here on Nintendo's part. We're not going to create this digital seamless store because, hey, when you buy our next device, and you want to play your favorite, Legacy Super Mario game again, well, you're going to download it again on the new digital storefront for that device. So there's definitely some of that game being played as well, and definitely not a fan of it, as I think it reduces the accessibility of gaming and it increases customer frustration. But again, Nintendo's product focus pushes them down this road to continue to concentrate on the product and tailor the experience to that product at the detriment of probably some long-term sensibilities. From a general business sense, this is what you see in other product-focused companies. And while some may do it better than Nintendo and some may do it worse, the product focus often pushes product-focused companies to concentrate on that differentiation, that aspect of the product that makes it different, because the market will inevitably tire of the product. So reinvention of said product sends most in the company to concentrate on enhancing that experience or creating the next generation of that product experience. There isn't a lot of company time spent on the background or tangential aspects of the product or company. And with that, I'd like to close this one and just say to you, to the audience, what do you see in Nintendo when you look at them? Do you see a product-focused company, or do you see a video game entertainment company that perhaps is making bad or perhaps good decisions in some of the underlying or tangential aspects of creating that video game experience? Or do you see a company that's doing all the right things with their product, meaning the things that they aren't spending money on is really where Nintendo doesn't have to spend money or concentrate company time? So I'll leave that question up to you. Thank you for stopping by Industry Insights. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please leave your questions or comments down in the comments section, and we'll talk to you next time. Have a great one.